Did you realize that in the state of California there is a battleship graveyard looming off the coast? You see, the United States Navy has a long history of fielding vessels, with hundreds serving throughout its long history. However, not all of these ships are currently in service. As the years go by, ships become obsolete, and the cost of keeping them in fighting form becomes too expensive for their performance. Most of these ships stay in the reserve fleets, either in the naval inactive ship maintenance facilities, 3 of which are in the country. However, there are other reserve fleet locations, one of which is in Suisun Bay near San Francisco. And today we will discover its mysterious stories, just rotting out on the water. I'm your host Ryan Socash, and you're watching It's History. Anyone curious about exploring abandoned places most certainly finds themselves in situations that require durability for what they consider precious. When I travel, I go light, but I always have my essential cards on hand. So having a durable carbon fiber wallet with my essentials is mission critical. Thanks to Ridge wallets, my cards are not only physically protected, but their RFID signals are blocked, keeping me safe from digital pickpocketers. I admire how this wallet's design recalls a stealthiness worthy of one's livelihood, and how it manages to bring the concept of a wallet into the security realities of the 21st century. So if you'd like to have the same wallet, I can save you 15% with my special coupon code in the description below. Click it to buy the wallet, and now let's get back to California's battleship graveyard. To start off, let's talk about what exactly this fleet is, an anchorage of the National Defense Reserve Fleet, or NDRF. Suisun Bay is one of 8 original fleet sites. Unlike a naval inactive ship maintenance facility, these ships are primarily cargo and tanker ships, though there are some very notable exceptions we will go into later. Well, there were originally 8 NDRFs, as the Navy scrapped, recycled, and all around disposed of most of the ships. The locations closed as the vessels faded away, so Suisun Bay is one of only 3 remaining NDRFs, and this reserve fleet was once far more extensive. While Suisun Bay once hosted nearly 60 ships, as the Navy thinned their reserve fleet to lighten up resources, that number dropped to a measly 6. But many of the stories of these lost vessels are simply fascinating, so let's start with the oldest ship in the bay today. The USS APL-24 may not have a particularly fashionable name, but she dates all the way back to World War II. As a quick aside, we will include hull classifications when introducing these vessels. The letters indicate what kind of ship it is, and the numbers identify an individual ship within a class. In this case, APL means non-self-propelled barracks ship, and 24 is her code. An APL-2 class barracks ship, APL-24 was laid down on July the 24th, 1944 in Stockton, California, and launched on September the 26th, 1944. Being a non-self-propelled vessel, she did not have any means of maneuvering herself. So you might ask, what exactly is the point of launching a ship that can't move? Well, barracks ships are used primarily as temporary housing for sailors whose ships remain uninhabitable, mainly due to damage. APL-24 was initially supposed to serve on the East Coast, presumably to shelter sailors who had lost their ships in the naval battles of Europe. She entered service on July the 24th, 1945, but remained on the West Coast beyond World War II. The Navy took it to San Diego on December the 14th, housing soldiers as their repairs from World War II continued to be finished. We should probably take a moment to note that the conditions aboard these barracks ships were not optimal, even by sailor standards, as the Navy constructed most of these kinds of barracks ships from 1944 to 1946. Conditions were rarely even tolerable, being very claustrophobic and packed with dangerous materials, such as lead paint and asbestos. And perhaps in light of these poor conditions, the ship was placed out of service by January the 15th, 1947, with the rest of the ships in her class following suit on March the 24th and June the 30th of the very same year. Her time in the reserve fleet took her from Long Beach to San Diego, Pearl Harbor, and ultimately the Suisun Bay Reserve Fleet, being struck from the Naval Vessel Registry on April the 1st, 1962. Another ship that remains in the Suisun Bay Reserve Fleet is the SS Green Mountain State ACS-9. Like APL-24, she does not have a direct role in battle, being a Keystone State-class crane ship designed to load cargo onto herself or other ships. For example, when aiding in offshore construction. She was laid down on December 2, 1963, and initially had a different name and class, as a Maritime Administration type hull. Her function at the time was to oversee national shipping, boating issues, and laws within the United States' maritime borders. Launched on August 20, 1964, she entered service with the United States Maritime Administration on March 26, 1965, under the Moore-McCormack Lines, a series of companies operating shipping lines. She served the shipping lines for years, gaining extensions to better carry cargo in 1975, changing hands once more in 1983 to the United States Lines. She earned a new name, the SS America Altair. When U.S. Lines ceased operations in 1986, the Maritime Administration reacquired her a year later, placing her in the National Defense Reserve Fleet. She remained in reserve for 6 years, after which she underwent refitting into a crane ship, as she remains to this very day. With this new change came yet another name upon completion in March 15, 1992, the SS Green Mountain State, named for Vermont, the state of the same title. Berthed at Burlington, Washington, the Navy assigned her to Maritime Prepositioning Ship Squadron 3 as a part of the Ready Reserve Force, maintained in a 5-day readiness status. If something were to occur where she was needed to enter action, she would be fully ready to sail the seas in less than a week. However, that action would never come. The Navy reassigned her to the National Defense Reserve Fleet on July 28, 2006, eventually taking her to the Suisun Bay Fleet, where she remains in reserve, awaiting to assist in logistical support should the need arise. Now, this next vessel is very fascinating and unusual, but we need to set the framework for you to understand why it came into existence. To say that tensions ran high between the United States and the Soviet Union would be quite literally the understatement of the century. At even the slightest chance for one to get an edge over the other, either of the two superpowers would jump immediately. One such chance arose in 1968 when the Soviet submarine K-129 sank around 1,600 miles northwest of Hawaii. This submarine was unique, sporting cutting-edge Soviet submarine technology, but most notably an SSN-5 Serb missile. This weapon had a ballistic range of 750 to 900 nautical miles, and disturbingly, a 1 megaton nuclear bomb warhead. The Soviet submarine sank on March 8, 1968, which the Soviet Navy did not notice at first. After around 2 months of radio silence, the Soviet Navy dispatched a large number of naval aircraft searching for the vulnerable vessel, but to no avail, and the United States, eager to get their hands on some secret Soviet technology, kept an eye on the situation. By March 8th, the United States Air Force picked up some sonic recordings of a detonation of some kind around 1,500 nautical miles northwest of Hawaii, and it was this that allowed them to acquire the longitude and latitude coordinates of the explosion's origin. Deep-sea reconnaissance followed almost immediately, and the U.S. Navy found their mark, taking over 20,000 photographs of the sunken nuclear submarine. When these images reached the desk of President Nixon and National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger, they approved the mission known as Project Azorin to recover the Soviet submarine before the USSR eventually knew they found it. This was to be the most difficult deep-sea salvage operation in history. The Soviet submarine laid at 17,000 feet beneath the surface, and the deepest salvage operation at that time was at about 245 feet. Not to mention, that was a satellite bucket that weighed only a few hundred pounds. This submarine weighed 2,000 tons, requiring some seriously specialized equipment. Or in other words, the Glomar Explorer, a drill ship platform purpose-built for this task alone. Constructed at the Sun Ship Building and Dry Dock, she took her maiden voyage on June 21st, 1974, and this coast-to-coast journey would be a long one, as she was too wide to fit through the Panama Canal. This was a necessary measure, though, as any lesser vessel would capsize upon lifting the Soviet K-129, and hence she began her voyage around the South American continent, and arriving at her destination on July 4th of 1974. And the complexity of this ship went far beyond its functions. You see, the Soviet Union would easily detect a ship as large as the Glomar Explorer, and they would certainly not take kindly to the United States taking a nuclear submarine of theirs off the ocean floor. As a result, the CIA developed a cover story that she had been purpose-built to extract manganese molds from the ocean floor. Her so-called extraction operation received a several-day delay due to foul weather, but eventually began the extraction. Or so it appeared. As the Glomar Explorer lowered her collection apparatus to the submarine, the Soviet warship Kazma arrived. On the Kazma was a helicopter ready to board the Glomar Explorer and seize her should she try anything suspicious. A Soviet naval tug later joined the monitoring force. Now under watch, the Glomar team continued the operation. They stacked boxes on her deck to prevent the helicopter from landing safely, but if any stray debris from the submarine floated to the surface, it would have been plainly obvious what the crew was doing. So on August the 4th, when the submarine was around 6,700 feet below the surface, the team noticed that the majority of the sub had broken off, and only about a third of it was secured by the claw. However, the remaining 2/3 did not surface, much to the team's relief. Then finally, on the same day that Nixon resigned the office of the presidency, the Glomar Explorer secured the K-129's remains in its pool without incident. The crew found several important documents which were immediately confiscated by the CIA, and of course the corpses of a handful of the 98 seamen who perished in the sub's explosion. The bodies only had 3 recognizable identities, but regardless, all were buried at sea with full honors. The Glomar Explorer returned to the mainland United States, and while the CIA wanted the rest of the submarine, protest from the Soviet ambassador prompted by a press leak quashed these plans. The recovered sections secured 2 of the submarine's nuclear torpedoes, so the operation met part of the CIA's original goal. The US Navy acquired the Glomar Explorer in September of 1976, placing her in the Suisun Bay Fleet but at a safe distance from the other ships. Trace radiation made her unsafe to keep near the others. While the refit for a general-purpose drill placed her back in service for several decades on various leases, she eventually met her fate in April of 2015 when her very own Transocean Ltd decided to scrap her. This California fleet is amazing. It proves that a vessel does not need to be a fighting ship to be of historic significance, and the USS Hoga YT-146 is a prime example of this. Laid down on July the 25th, 1940 and commissioned on May the 22nd, 1941, she was a simple Woban-class district harbor tug. This tug would have likely remained unremarkable if not for her location on December the 7th, 1941, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. The USS Hoga was present. She did not fight, but within 10 minutes of the first bombs, she jumped into action, rescuing sailors thrown into the water, fighting off fires, and pulling ships away from target locations. She pulled the USS Vestal away from the burning USS Arizona, saving the repair ship from meeting a similar fate to the martyred battleship. She also assisted the damaged USS Ogallala, a minesweeper, and the battleship USS Nevada, preventing the sinking hulk from blocking the channel. In light of all this, Admiral Chester A. Nimitz bestowed a commendation on her and her crew in recognition for her heroic actions. However, her work in the Pacific theater was not complete. She assisted in clearing debris and salvage of lost and damaged vessels throughout the entire war, on top of her task of helping ships in and out of their berths. After the war's conclusion, the Hoga entered service to the city of Oakland, California, as a fireboat. In this service, she gained a new name, the City of Oakland, named for the city she protected for nearly 50 years. After receiving firefighting modifications, she served as a tour boat for President Jimmy Carter's tour of the Port of Oakland on July the 3rd, 1980. On June the 30th, 1989, she gained the status of a national landmark and actually returned to the Navy in 1994. However, they struck her from their registry a year later. From there, she entered the Suisun Bay Reserve Fleet, but eventually went to Little Rock, Arkansas on November the 23rd, 2015, becoming a permanent static display at their Inland Maritime Museum. Now, unlike the rest of the ships discussed today, our final is most certainly a warship, the USS Iowa, BB-61, was the last lead ship of any United States battleship class, laid down on June the 27th, 1940, launched on August the 27th, 1942, and commissioned on February the 22nd, 1943. One of her first missions was to counter the threat of German battleship torpedoes, which supposedly was operating in the Norwegian waters. Her next mission of note saw her take President Franklin D. Roosevelt to Casablanca as his first part of the journey to the Tehran Conference in November. She took him back to the United States after a conference as well. She was the only American battleship to serve in the Atlantic theater of the Second World War. After these operations, she took to the Pacific theater as the flagship of Battleship Division 7. She served in the Marshall Islands, the Caroline Islands, New Guinea, and the Battle of the Philippine Sea. In the Battle of the Philippine Sea, she repelled 4 enormous air raids from the last of Japan's carriers in their center force, destroying most of their remaining carrier-based aircraft. The Iowa sister ship, the USS New Jersey, which we have discussed in a previous video about abandoned battleships, was also heavily involved in the Battle of the Philippine Sea. She continued with many operations in the Pacific theater, serving until the cessation of hostilities on August the 15th, 1945. She entered Tokyo Bay with occupation forces on August the 29th and served as Admiral William F. Halsey's flagship for the surrender ceremony on September the 2nd, when Douglas MacArthur accepted the Japanese surrender, marking the end of the largest war in human history. She returned to the United States on October the 15th, 1945, but would actually find her way back to Japan in January of the following year to be the flagship of the Fifth Fleet. After bouncing around the West Coast for several more years on Naval Reserve, the Navy decommissioned her on March the 24th, 1949. However, when the active fleet expanded due to communist activity in Korea, she re-entered the Navy on August the 25th, 1951. In combat operations in the Korean War, she bombarded enemy targets and aided ground troops. After the Korean War, she took part in a major NATO naval exercise known as Operation Mariner. Following that, she operated around the Virginia Cape area, acting as a flagship of the Rear Admiral R.E. Libby. From there, she continued serving around the Atlantic and the Mediterranean, and took part in another significant NATO exercise, Strike Back. The Navy decommissioned her once again on February the 24th, 1958, entering the Atlantic Reserve Fleet in Philadelphia, and as he did with her sister ship, the New Jersey, President Ronald Reagan personally reactivated her in 1982, pursuing his goal of a 600-ship Navy. During this reactivation period, she set the record for the longest range 16-inch shell ever fired at 23.4 nautical miles. Though, with the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, the United States did not need such a large navy, and so the USS Iowa was decommissioned one final time on October the 26th, 1990, after nearly 20 years of service. Initially, she remained in the Naval Station Newport, but in March of 2001, she began a journey to the Suisun Bay under tow, arriving on April the 21st, 2001. She entered the reserve fleet, but the Navy struck her from the registry in March of 2006. The USS Iowa remained in the Suisun Bay until November of 2011, when she traveled under tow one last time to the port of Richmond for rehabilitation, and then to Los Angeles, becoming an open exhibit at the Battleship Expo. Iowa earned 9 battle stars throughout her career and has quite the reputation. Some called her the world's greatest naval ship due to the speed, strength, flexibility, and durability that allowed her to keep up with changes in technology for nearly 50 years of active service. The Suisun Bay Reserve Fleet now only consists of 6 ships. The rest have been repurposed, turned into museums, or scrapped. While the government could theoretically lift these ships from their current status, the US Navy likely has more ships ready for action that are newer and more capable than these older models. And while some are more notable than others, one can still look at this mysterious reserve fleet with appreciation and awe at what they've done for the nation. So keep their stories alive by sharing this video and subscribing to its history. This is Ryan Socash signing off.